Lucas was a 28-year-old writer in search of inspiration for his next novel. After years of battling writer's block in the big city, he decided to move to an old house in the countryside. Surrounded by dense forests and silent hills, the house, rented at a surprisingly low price, seemed perfect, isolated, with large windows overlooking the natural scenery and an attic he imagined turning into his office. The realtor, an elderly man with shifty eyes, only mentioned that the house had a history. But Lucas, eager for a fresh start, ignored the comment. The house was made of wood. With red tiles worn by time and a neglected garden, the interior smelled of mold, and the old furniture creaked at the slightest touch. Lucas settled in quickly, bringing only the essentials, his laptop, a few books, and a suitcase of clothes. He was determined to write something dark, a psychological thriller that would capture the essence of human fear. Little did he know, the house would give him more inspiration than he could handle. On the first night, while organizing his belongings, Lucas heard a sound coming from the roof. It was a slow scraping, as if something heavy were moving across the tiles. He opened the window and looked up, but the night's darkness swallowed everything. He chalked it up to the wind or some animal, maybe a raccoon, and went back to bed. But the sound persisted, now more rhythmic, like deliberate footsteps. Lucas tried to ignore it, but the discomfort lingered until he fell asleep. In the following days, Lucas began adapting to the house's routine. He wrote in the mornings, walked through the forest in the afternoons, and read at night under the light of an old lamp. But the sounds on the roof continued. They always came at night, not regular enough to be dismissed, but constant enough to keep him on edge. Sometimes it was a dragging sound, other times a soft tapping, as if someone were testing the strength of the tiles. One night, while furiously typing a scene for his novel, Lucas heard a different sound, a sharp crack, followed by a low murmur, almost human. He stopped, fingers frozen on the keyboard. The murmur seemed to come from the attic, directly above him, heart pounding. He grabbed a flashlight and climbed the narrow staircase to the attic. The space was empty, save for a few dust-covered boxes and a broken window letting in the wind. There was nothing unusual, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. As he descended, Lucas noticed something strange on the attic window. Handprints in the dust from the outside. They were large, with long, thin fingers, as if something or someone had tried to get in. He tried to rationalize. Maybe they were old marks from someone repairing a roof. But the dust looked recent, and the prints weren't there when he moved in. The following week, Lucas began noticing that the roof sounds weren't random. They followed a pattern, always starting round midnight and stopping before dawn. He tried recording the sounds on his phone, but the audio only captured static, as if something was interfering with the recording. One night, frustrated, he climbed onto the roof with a flashlight, determined to find the source. The roof was steep and slippery, and Lucas moved carefully, holding onto the tiles. The flashlight swept through the darkness, but there was nothing, only moss and loose tiles. Then, in the corner of the roof, he saw something that made him freeze. A tall, thin figure crouched near the chimney. The shape looked human, but its posture was off. With limbs too long to be normal, before Lucas could shine the light fully on it, the figure vanished as if it had dissolved into the darkness. He climbed down quickly, locking every door and window. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in the living room, holding a baseball bat he'd found in the basement. Eyes fixed on the ceiling, the sounds returned louder, more insistent, as if the thing on the roof knew he had seen it. Determined to understand what was happening, Lucas began investigating the house's history. He visited the town library and spoke to local residents. An elderly librarian, Dona Rosa, told him a disturbing story. Decades ago, the house belonged to a man named Elias, a recluse who lived alone after his wife's death. It was said Elias was obsessed with protecting the house from intruders, spending nights on the roof with a shotgun. One night, he vanished without a trace, and the house sat empty for years. Some locals believed Elias never left the house, that his spirit still lingered on the roof, watching. Lucas found an old newspaper at the library with a headline about Elias's disappearance. The article mentioned that Elias was often seen on the roof, talking to himself, as if responding to someone who wasn't there. There were also reports from neighbors who heard strange laughter coming from the house at night. Back at the house, Lucas began noticing more signs. Objects moved without explanation. A glass appeared in the attic. A chair was shifted into the hallway. One night, he found muddy footprints on the living room floor, leading to the attic stairs. The prints were large, with unnaturally long toes identical to the handprints on the window. The events escalated. One night, while writing, Lucas heard a sound that made him jump. A deep, guttural laugh coming from the roof. He ran to the window and saw, for the first time, the figure clearly. It was a man or something that resembled a man with pale skin and sunken eyes glowing like embers. It was crouched on the roof, staring directly at Lucas, wearing a grin that seemed to split its face. Lucas screamed and closed the curtains, but the laughter continued, now echoing inside the house. He ran to the basement, the only room without windows, and locked himself in, clutching the baseball bat. The rooftop sounds stopped, but were replaced by knocks on the basement door slow. Deliberate, Lucas spent the night there, trembling, unable to sleep. The next day, he sought help. A childhood friend, Thiago, who lived in the city, came to the house. Thiago was skeptical but agreed to stay the night to reassure Lucas. That night, they both heard the sounds on the roof, and Thiago, though reluctant, admitted something strange was happening. They decided to go up to the attic together, armed with flashlights and the bat. There, they found something that left them speechless. A charcoal drawing on the wall, depicting a tall, thin figure holding an axe, with eyes glowing red. Desperate, Lucas contacted a local medium, Dona Lucia. Known for dealing with hauntings, she visited the house and immediately sensed a heavy energy. In the attic, she performed a ritual with candles and herbs, chanting words in a language Lucas didn't recognize. During the ritual, the candles extinguished on their own, and the temperature dropped drastically. Dona Lucia looked disturbed, saying the entity in the house was not a common spirit, but something older and malevolent tied to the land the house was built on. That night, Lucas and Thiago decided to confront the entity. Armed with flashlights, salt, and a crucifix left by Dona Lucia, they climbed onto the roof. The figure was there, crouched, its eyes glowing in the dark. It stood up, revealing an inhuman height. With limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally, Lucas shouted at it to leave them alone. Holding up the crucifix, the figure left a sound that tore through the air and advanced. Panicking, Thiago threw salt at the figure, which recoiled as if burned. Lucas took the chance to run to the chimney, where he saw something glinting, a metallic object lodged between the stones. It was an old medallion, engraved with strange symbols. He yanked it out and smashed it on the ground with his foot. A deafening scream echoed, and the figure vanished, leaving behind only a cold gust of wind. After the confrontation, Lucas and Thiago took the medallion to Dona Lucia. She examined it and revealed it was a protective amulet, corrupted by an ancient ritual. According to her, Elias had made a pact with an entity to protect his home, but the pact bound him to the property, turning him into something no longer human. The medallion was the anchor that kept the entity tied to the house. Lucas decided he couldn't stay there any longer. He burned the medallion in a ritual overseen by Don Lucia, and the rooftop sounds ceased. The house felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. Lucas moved back to the city, but took the story with him. He wrote a novel based on his experience, titled The Man on the Roof, which became a success. Years later, Lucas revisited the house, now abandoned again. He needed closure. The roof was in ruins, and the attic seemed untouched by time. When he climbed up, he found something that made his blood run cold. A new charcoal drawing on the wall showing the same figure, but now with Lucas's face. He ran out, vowing never to return. The house was demolished months later, but local residents say that on nights with a full moon, a dragging sound can still be heard on the land where it once stood. Lucas never wrote horror again, but he carries with him the certainty that something watched him in that house and maybe still does. The end.